A little bit about the timber industry, and we know that that played a role in bringing the railroad to the region, and a lot of the branch lines in different places were motivated by large stands of virgin timber. And what is tie hacking? You remember from the film? Yeah, remember that the Shannon County film talked a little bit about tie hacking. I think even showed maybe a little bit of that. And that's the process of making railroad ties, which up until well into the 20th century, they were made by hand. Yeah, with a broad axe. So these were very common activities. You can see that the railroads themselves consumed lots and lots of wood. Just the process of cutting all those ties for the building of railroad tracks consumed lots and lots of wood. When in southeast Missouri, where these great pine forests were, when the railroads came in and the timber companies first came in, it was people bragged that there was a 300-year supply of timber and stuff like that, but it didn't hardly last 300 years. It lasted, in most cases, less than 50 years before all the really accessible, good forests had been cut out in southeast Missouri. The way this developed was southeast Missouri and the pine forests, the hardwood forest of parts of Missouri, northwest Arkansas, they were just the latest in a line of forests that these companies had traveled. Sometimes some of these companies trace their roots all the way back to New England, having gone from New England to like upstate New York, to the Great Lakes, Michigan, Wisconsin, cutting the forests up there, and then coming down the Mississippi River to Missouri, on down to Louisiana, to the deep south pine forest after that. A lot of these were the same companies. They just migrated from one virgin forest area to the next, and cut out the really big companies got the easiest, most accessible trees and then moved on. I mean, they were after efficiency, spend as little money as you can, get the most profit you can, and then move on. And then there would be other smaller companies, or sometimes local mom and pop operations, that after the big companies left would come in and harvest the timber that was left. And that's what you've still got, for the most part today in the Ozarks, that's what you've still got are these smaller timber companies. You got some big timber companies operating in the Ozarks, but in most places it's the smaller mills that are just kind of poking around because the virgin forests are gone, and they aren't coming back in our lifetime. They aren't coming back until people just completely quit cutting trees for a couple hundred years and let them come back. But so those days are over, and that 300-year supply turned out not to be a 300-year supply. We know that we saw a little footage on the Shannon County film of cutting and floating these ties, hacking ties, and floating them down rivers. That was very common. Usually floating them down to the nearest railroad spot where they could be loaded onto railroad cars and shipped off to wherever they were needed. So the railroad's always involved in this somehow. And then speaking of that pine timber industry in southeast Missouri, Grandin is the best example of a timber boom town over in southeast Missouri. It was the site of a huge mill that cut pine timber on a branch, on a railroad branch, and it was founded by some businessmen, some lumbermen from Pennsylvania, who sent one of their guys into southeast Missouri to run the operation. And Most of the profits were funneled out of the region, as generally happened with the timber industry and a lot of the mining industry as well. And you can see there at the peak of this operation in Grandin, Missouri, you had over 1,200 workers just in the mills alone, and that's not counting all the lumberjacks out there and the farmers who cut timber and sold it to the company. So you had a massive operation, a massive mill that closed down in the early 1900s in Grandin. And today, if you go to Grandin, there's just not much of anything. The last time I was in Grandin, there was a little store, like a bank branch, and that was about it in Grandin. But at one time, it was the largest town in that whole area. It was the first town in that whole area of southeast Missouri to get electricity. It had a brand new, it had a big high school, like a top-rated high school, big library, had a hospital. It was just, but it was all funded by this lumber company money. And once the lumber company up and moved its operation somewhere else, Grandin just pretty much folded, and it's been in a century of decline since then.